Hello, good morning. It's Lizzie. We've got almost 100 or so of you on already. And so for those of you who are on, I'll ask, as I typically do, to find your chat. Thank you, Kat. Kat knows where hers is. If you guys can find the question and answer box, we've got some people who are new always to us. We'll be spending some time today, but we want to make sure that you are able to interact with us, answer questions, things like that. So make sure that you are finding the questions and answers to let us know maybe where you're in from, maybe where you're, if it's your first time, which company are you listening from? I saw a GR insurance person on. I know Ravenswood Title always has folks listening, GRI, GRA, proper, any Legacy Stearns folks. Oh, Crystal, you and I both. I am so excited about today's topic. I was just talking to the fine doctor and to Ella before we were starting to say that much like we talked about last month, money, this topic is like, if I keep questioning myself, what if I just, can I do it another time? Can I like, what else could I achieve more and then I'll fix it? Like the idea that we can talk about what is that mental piece kind of saying to you is going to be so important. So excited topic. So thank you. Kelsey's like, all right, it's my second time, but I'm still going to chat and perfect. Let us know. Love it. Proper rate in Michigan. Hi, Joyce. Pleasure to have you. We'll be getting started here in just a couple of minutes. Underwriting, first time, Jamie, thank you. I'm certainly not happy that we are not like having as much volume as always, because it's always good for us in this business to be very busy. But I do love that maybe underwriters can come to the talk. If you don't have so many files that it's really hard for you to listen in real time. I know so many underwriters tell me that they have to listen after we post the recording. So as a reminder for everyone, we will post today's presentation on rate.com/grow. So it's available to you, to your referral partners. It's available like on the actual internet page for Grow, but it usually takes us until the end of the day to get posted. Laura, how are you? Many of your faces I have not gotten to meet in person, but Laura Lockerbie is not one of them. I got to meet Laura when we were on the President's Club trip, so welcome, excited to have. Also, it is just about 11 o'clock, and I'm so excited. You know, so many of you, I've been talking to you like live from my living room, but today I have people in the office. You've all been wondering, come. My camera's over this way, you guys have to snuggle up. Turquoise, anyone know Turquoise? Runs DEI for us. Familiar faces, the lead group. Hello, Shaq has made it in. Jan, get over here. Jan Thomas as well. Nadine, who is our EVP of Culture. For those of you who aren't aware, I've been saying I'm like live from my living room, alone in my office. Look at this, all of these fun people that are here today. So thank you all. Welcome. Fan mail. Hey, ladies. Dina's like, hello. Yeah, exciting, Kat. I know. You would think I wouldn't be so excited to have company, but when no one's been over for so long, it's like super exciting. Hold on. Nadine and Jan, I'm like missing you over like, and everyone see my super messy office if I have to put the camera back much more. For those of you who don't know, I'm not very good at being paperless. I have Post-it notes everywhere, tons of paper. All right, well, thank you, our culture team and DEI representatives and love. We'll let them join from their camera here when they can actually see, but in the meantime, it's 11 o'clock exactly, and I want to introduce Dr. Adia Gooden. Dr. Adia Gooden, if you would like to join us on camera, I would love it. A licensed clinical psychologist, a sought-after dynamic speaker, is talking constantly about this unconditional self-worth, imposter syndrome, something that we can't get enough topics about. So I will let you take it from here. They hear from me all the time. They're ready to hear from you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lizzie. Very happy to be here with you all today, and excited to kind of share this talk and workshop. So we're going to be talking about embracing your unconditional self-worth for mental peace and professional success. So to give you a bit of an overview, we're going to start by talking about self-worth and imposter syndrome, sort of what each of those things are. We're going to talk about how imposter syndrome and self-worth show up at work. I'm going to guide you to envision your life of unconditional self-worth. And then I'm going to share some strategies for mental peace and professional success. And these strategies are going to be helpful in terms of connecting you to your unconditional self-worth as well as overcoming imposter syndrome. All right, so let me know. Well, maybe don't let me know, because you can type in the chat for sure, but at least think to yourself whether any of this sounds or feels familiar. So do you ever feel stressed, overworked, always pushing yourself to make sure you exceed or at least meet your work goals, right? So sort of constantly pushing and pushing and pushing to try to meet the goals, to exceed those goals, etc. Do you have trouble checking out of work and resting because you're always thinking about whether you've made a mistake or you could have done something better? You know, you go home at the end of the day ready to wrap up and wind down, but find yourself constantly checking your email, or you lay down at night feeling exhausted and suddenly your mind is so awake thinking about, oh, you didn't do this, you didn't do that, you need to do this, all these things, right? Do you ever experience that? Do you ever feel like you're working every day just to prove that you deserve to be at your organization, right? You were hired, you were brought on for a reason, but it still sort of feels like you've got to prove yourself every day. And do you ever worry that any mistake you make is proof that you don't deserve to have your job, right? So maybe, type in the chat if any of these things resonate, right? Like, have you ever experienced any of these things? Just check in with yourself, type in the chat if some of this resonates with you.
Oh no, you are all resonating together and feverishly through the chat to go, uh-oh, yeah, well, I'm glad I'm here today. Yes, 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 and yeah, oh, that one too. Wait, other ones do that? There's a whole slew of you are in really good company of some overachievers today. Absolutely.
Yes. Thank you for that, Lizzie. And I think it's so important, right? Because we can really feel alone in these things, and we can really feel like we look around at everybody else and everybody else seems to have it together perfectly, but we feel like we're struggling. And so just even understanding, like, no, some of these things are so common and you're not alone in dealing with them. And so that's kind of what we're going to get at today. So let's start by talking about imposter syndrome. So I'm imagining that you've heard about imposter syndrome at this point. It's a pretty sort of widely discussed phenomenon. And, basically imposter syndrome was first, discussed by two women psychologists in, I think it was the 70s. And basically, they were working with a group of high achieving women. So these were women who were in PhD programs or had JDs, but, were doing very well. And what they found was that these women, despite the fact that they were doing really well in their careers, felt like fakes or frauds, right? So basically, imposter syndrome is the feeling of being a fake or a fraud despite evidence of high achievement, right? So it's having the position you have, it's getting a promotion, it's, getting a degree, it's doing all of these things, but still sort of feeling like maybe I got this job by mistake. Maybe I'm tricking people into thinking that I'm smart enough, right? If they really knew me, if they really understood what I do and do not know, I would lose my job, right? Everything would fall apart, because the only reason this is working is because they don't really know me and I'm just tricking them into thinking I'm doing a good job, right? So I mean, essentially, it's not feeling good enough. It's feeling like I don't belong here. I don't know if I'm good enough to be here. I don't know if I have anything to contribute. And I'm scared that any mistake, any, silly question is going to expose me as an imposter, as a fake or a fraud. And so I sort of walk around feeling like, oh gosh, like, what if they find me out? So what I want to know, and we're going to do a quick poll, is, have you ever experienced imposter syndrome?
Oh, all right. Let's go. I'm going to guess with, so since I'd never mind, I'm not answering on the screen. Let me just type in, yeah, I think she's talking about me. So give us your vote on the screen as well. Have you ever felt like an imposter? Not sure. Because again, imposter's a little different, right? We just heard her say it's like you're afraid people will find out they're not as smart as they think you are. They're not as together as you think you are. Is that might be a little different than even some of you who said you felt like you were stressed or weren't sure. Thank you, Daphne, for saying, yeah, Daphne's like, I'm not sure if that, wait a second. Thanks for reminding me I'm not alone. Anyone else want to answer on the screen? Anyone else felt like, uh-oh, people will find out. Don't have it all together all the time. Good, none of us do. All right, Ella, I think we've got them. Uh-oh, that's a lot. Are we representative, Dr. Edie, of 80% yes about, 8% no, and 13% not sure?
Yes. Can you all hear me? I'm having a little bit of trouble. Okay, you can hear me?
Oh, yeah, a box came up that said your system has come out of applicant. Like we can see that part, but.
Okay, all right.
Yep, we're back.
So I couldn't see the poll. I lost it, but research generally shows that 70% of people experience imposter syndrome. So if y'all are at 80, it probably just means that you have more high achievers. So that is sort of around what we would expect, right? And I think that's really good to know because again, so often we feel like we're the only ones. We think, you know, Lizzie over there, she's amazing and she's perfect and she does everything right, but I'm over here struggling and hiding and whatever. And, knowing that, yeah, maybe Lizzie does experience some imposter syndrome is actually helpful because then you can start to say, well, if she experiences it and that doesn't make any sense, maybe it doesn't make sense for me either, right? So often we're sort of alone and isolated in feeling this way. But just knowing, like, a lot of the people that you're impressed by, a lot of the people that you look up to have also experienced imposter syndrome, which is not to say that there's nothing we can do about it, right? Because we're going to talk about some strategies, but it is to say to just know that this is a common phenomenon. And it's not something that is just isolated to you. So hopefully seeing those the results of the poll helped you to feel like, oh yeah, maybe I'm not alone in experiencing this. So one of the things that I always like to talk about when I'm talking about imposter syndrome is what imposter syndrome looks like for people from underrepresented groups or historically marginalized groups. And that can include women, it can include people of color, it can include people with disabilities, right? People from groups that are sort of historically underrepresented or have experienced some discrimination, sexism, racism, ableism, something like that. And because I think that it's important to acknowledge that there are actually things that happen sort of systemically that can influence our feelings of not belonging or our feelings of being imposters. So the first thing that I think is useful to talk about is stereotype threat. So stereotype threat is basically a phenomenon identified by social psychologists. And what it is basically what they've determined is that when you feel stressed about confirming a negative stereotype about your group, that stress is going to interfere with your performance, okay? So there's a classic research study example of this. So in this research study, they took two groups of female students who were high achieving in the area of math, college students who were excellent in the area of math. And we know that there's a stereotype about women not being good at math. And so in this study, they had two conditions. So with one group, they administered a math exam that was challenging. And in this group, they primed the women to think about their gender. And they just did that by, on a standardized test, you have to fill in the bubbles, like what's your race, what's your gender, that sort of thing. So they did that. They primed the women to think about their gender, and then they gave the women the test. And what they found was that group of women, despite the fact that they had shown high levels of achievement in the area of math, that group of women underperformed what would be expected given their other level of achievement. And the idea is that that group of women, likely because they were primed to think about their gender, was concerned that their performance on this test might confirm the negative stereotype that women are not good at math. And then that stress they were feeling about, oh my gosh, what if I don't do well? And then they're going to think I'm not good at math and women aren't good at math. That then interfered with their ability to perform at their best on the test, right? So that's the first group. In the second group, they took a similar group of high achieving women in the area of math, and they gave them the same exam. But this time, instead of priming the women to think about their gender, what they said was, there are some math exams that show gender differences, right? There's some math exams that show differences between women and men. This exam doesn't do that, right? So what they were doing is they were neutralizing the concern that these women's performance on the exam could confirm the negative stereotype, right? So they said that, had the women take the exam, and what they found was that those women performed at their expected level, right? So the idea is that when you are not stressed that someone may be thinking less of you because of your identity group, you are better able to perform. But if you are stressed about it, if you're thinking, I'm in a room of all men, or I'm the only Black person, or I have a disability and I'm worried that I'm going to be judged or stigmatized for it, when you're worried about that, and that worry is based on real understandable concerns, right? Because there are issues with discrimination, with isms, right, that you have to contend with. But when you worry about that, then that causes you to underperform. And the problem is, where it gets sticky with imposter syndrome is if you start to blame that underperformance on yourself, and you start to say, well, see, I'm not even performing as well as I thought I could, or as well as I did when I was in maybe another environment that felt safer or more supportive. So I must be an imposter. I'm really not supposed to be here, right? That is what that narrative can create. And so the challenge is to recognize that there is stress that happens when you are from a historically underrepresented group, but that doesn't mean that you're not qualified or capable, right? We just want to try not to let that sort of seep into feelings of imposter syndrome. So that's the first part. The other piece that I think is useful to recognize is that there are some narratives, unfortunately, in our society around diversity initiatives, around having people from diverse groups in positions that can end up fueling feelings of imposter syndrome, right? So one narrative is tokenism, right? We're admitting or giving jobs to people from this group because it looks better, not because they're qualified, but because we need to do a better job of having a diverse representation, right? Or we're gifting this job. And that really is problematic because it's not true, right? Because that narrative says you didn't get this job because you're qualified, you got this job because you're from an identity group. And that really isn't true. So we really want to push back against those ideas. The other piece is that it's challenging to be the only, right? It's challenging to be the only or one of very few in your organization. And so it can be hard, it can be stressful. You may experience microaggressions, you may experience other things that take a toll on you and exacerbate your feeling of being an imposter. And not to mention that just the being one of the only or one of very few can make you feel like maybe people like me aren't supposed to be in roles like this because there's nobody else in the role, or there's no leaders in this role, etc. And then I think, the last part is we don't want to take in negative messages, right? Because there can be negative messages. I often tell the story that, so I went to Stanford for undergrad, which was awesome. And when I got in, there were some, I had a classmate who said that I only got in because I was Black. And I like to joke now that, yeah, I just sent Stanford my picture and I was like, hey, I think you need more Black girls, so you should just let me in. I'm not going to send you my grades, my test scores, my essays. I'm not going to send you my recommendations. Like, just let me in. I'm a Black girl, right? And so that highlights that it's ridiculous, right? It is ridiculous to think that I just got into Stanford because I'm Black, but that can be a narrative. And the risk, thankfully, I didn't take it in, is that I would then believe this classmate who said, you don't really deserve to go to Stanford and you only got in because you're Black. I could have internalized that. I could have said, maybe I don't deserve. Maybe they made a mistake. Maybe I just got in because I'm Black. So that is the risk, right? We cannot control what other people do and say, but we can control how we take it in or don't take it in. And so we want to be very thoughtful to not internalize any negative messages that we receive about who we are in any aspect of the way we are that might make us feel like we're not supposed to be here, we're imposters. Okay, so I just want to check in with you, Lizzie. Are you getting any comments or questions about this sort of piece, this intersection between our identities, and particularly if you have a marginalized identity, and imposter syndrome that you might experience? Because I just want to pause and check in to see if there's anything coming up around that before I move into self-worth.
So there are a ton of really great comments and people going, oh my gosh, yes, like how absurd is this story that yes, like Stanford just had this like back door open, like sure, come on in, because it's not Stanford. And so people have said they feel like that happens with ageism, or they feel like that happens with being new. I loved a message from Kim who said, I need to think about in the remote environment, getting out of my own head. You don't have someone to ask questions to, so you get nervous about like, is this a dumb question? Is this a heavy enough thing for me to ask someone, or will they expect that I know that? And the other one I wanted to bring up to you was someone that said, fake it until you make it. And I feel like, which is fine, but once you've made it, you're done, right? Once you've made it, there is no more. You're not faking it. You're here, you've made it, you've gotten it. I think that there's quite a few that are saying, I'm ready for some, how do I reprogram? How do I turn off that switch? How did you not let someone who would say something so absurd and hurtful, like how do you kind of go with like, I'm at Stanford, like check my test scores, thanks, peace. Like how do you move from that place where you can let that go? Lots are waiting for that part. Like, tell me how to do it.
Well, I'm so glad this is resonating with you all, and we will get to strategies. I promise, I promise, I promise. So let's talk a little bit about self-worth. So self-worth is really about how we see ourselves, how we treat ourselves, how we show up for ourselves, right? It's about our relationship with ourselves. And I actually think that our relationship with ourselves is the most important relationship we will ever have. It is the most enduring relationship we will ever have. It is the one relationship that we cannot get out of. Not possible, right? While you're alive. And it's also, I think, the most neglected and overlooked relationship. And so I'm sort of on a mission to help people to start to think about, what is your relationship with yourself, right? How do you treat yourself? How do you see yourself? And to know that makes a difference, right? We're usually way more focused on how other people see and treat us than on how we're treating and seeing ourselves. But the reality is, again, we can only control ourselves. We cannot control how other people see and treat us, but we can control how we see and treat ourselves. So that's my little soapbox. I'll get off of it. But basically, so that's self-worth. The core of self-worth is, how do you see yourself? How do you treat yourself? How do you relate to yourself? And then within self-worth, I think it's useful to sort of have an understanding of where you are on a spectrum. And so there's low self-worth, right? And when you're experiencing low self-worth, you're feeling unworthy of love, of care, of respect. You feel like you're not good enough, right? It's sort of like I don't even know why anybody likes me. I don't know why anybody hired me. I don't really have anything to contribute. Like, you just feel really not good about yourself, right? You don't see yourself well. You're not probably treating yourself well. You're not expecting other people to treat you well. And then conditional self-worth is believing that you are only worthy if you achieve the conditions you've placed on your worth. And I think a lot of us rest in this conditional self-worth place, right? We say, if I get the job, if I get, get the partner, if I make the money, if I lose the weight, whatever it is, then I will be worthy. And so some of the conditions that we commonly place on our self-worth are job title, salary, academic achievement, appearance, relationship status, attention on social media. It could be the type of house you have, the city you live in, the car you drive, the purse you have, the shoes you have, how your nails look, your hair, but it's basically things outside of us. And sometimes it could be never making a mistake, right? So that's often what perfectionism looks like, right? If you get everything perfect, then you can be worthy. Always, always being on time, always being ahead of the game, always whatever, right? There are lots of things that we can sort of put as conditions on our self-worth. And basically what that means is, if that thing goes away, or if we don't achieve it, then we don't feel worthy, right? And if we get that thing, usually what happens, and this was very true for my own life, you achieve the condition that will make you feel worthy. And it makes you feel worthy for a little bit. If you're lucky, you might get a few weeks or months in there, but usually it's pretty fleeting. Usually it's like, okay, yeah, like I got this job, but what's next? Yeah, I just got a new car, but it's okay now. Right now it feels regular. Or, yeah, I have a new partner, but when are we going to get engaged? And when are we going to get married? And when are we going to have kids? Right? Like, it's always the next thing. So I'd love to have you all type into the chat, just like, is it like, are there conditions that y'all are putting on your self-worth? Like, is this something that you're doing to yourselves? Is this something that's resonating? Do you have some conditions that you tend to put on yourself in order to feel worthy?
Lots that are saying yes, or saying, hey, I didn't realize that I was doing that, but there are quite a few of you. I think Marty, Liz, someone else had typed, but once you get that one thing, it's never enough. There is the next thing. It's like, but are my kids behaving well enough? Is my house nice enough? Is it clean enough? Is it like, yep, it worked for a second, now I'm on to the next thing. Like, what's the next? It's that never able to fulfill that hole, because it's not about that stuff. Is that our problem? It's not about any of those things, right? They're all, how do I, and a couple people who are saying, I just wasn't even realizing I was doing that. That was part of that. How do I get to the next, when I get there, I'll do that. I think so many of us lose weight, gain weight, and somehow that then is tied to then I'll have enough, which I think for many are saying, like, it doesn't, it's a really hard way to live your life. It's a really hard work. Never get there. This treadmill that you can't get to stop.
Yep. Yes. And I think, so that you can be gracious with yourselves, society sets us up for this, right? We see constant advertisements about, if you look this way, you'll be happy. If you have this car, you'll be happy. If you dress like this, you'll be happy. If you have this many kids, you'll be happy. Right? Like, that is sort of we're constantly inundated with messages, explicit and implicit, around this is what you need to do to be happy and to feel good enough. And so most of us come by this honestly, right? Most of us are like, okay, like, I want to be happy. I want to feel good about myself. So let me do the things that my family, my friends, my community, society, advertisers are telling me will get there. But then we start to get confused, because we're like, I'm doing all the things, but I'm tired. And it's always another thing. And I always have to chase after something else. And I don't feel totally at peace and fulfilled. And so, is it me? Is there a problem with it? Is it really that I'm not worthy? Is that the issue? But no, it's not that you're not worthy. It's that this is sort of a setup. And so the challenge for us is like, how do we get out of this game? How do we get out of the like game of just continuing to try the next thing, the next thing, the next thing, the next thing? So let's talk about this sort of intersections, right? So I started with imposter syndrome, then I talked about self-worth. Why am I putting these things together? Well, I think they're really related. And at the highest level, I really think of imposter syndrome as a manifestation of low self-worth or conditional self-worth. And so both low self-worth and conditional self-worth can leave us feeling unworthy of love, success, and happiness, and like we don't deserve good things. And when we're unsure of our self-worth, we often question our contributions and the contributions we can make to our workplace and our world. And then this can lead to imposter syndrome, which causes us to feel like we don't deserve the position we're in and there's nothing we can contribute, right? So you can kind of see how feelings of low self-worth or feelings of conditional self-worth, feelings of I need to be perfect, I have to do the perfect job, never make a mistake, always know everything, right? How that could lead into feelings of imposter syndrome, because it's impossible to do everything perfectly. And it makes sense that you're going to have some questions, right? I'm thinking about the person who typed in the chat and said, yeah, as a new person who's in a virtual world, like, I don't know what questions are okay. It makes me not want to ask questions. And then, and then that can make you feel like an imposter because you don't know what you're supposed to know. It's hard to ask, et cetera, et cetera. So I think of, self-worth issues as sort of more underlying, and imposter syndrome as sort of like how this shows up specifically in like the work, academic, professional achievement kind of world. So here's some ways that this can manifest, right? Like this is how these things can look in our lives. So one is perfectionism. I've mentioned perfectionism a few times because it is so common, right? And when we have perfectionistic tendencies, it means we sort of feel like unless it's perfect, it's not good enough, right? And it just is exhausting to try to get everything perfect and then to sort of tear ourselves down or tear our work down when it's not perfect, right? So let's say I do a great presentation, but I realized afterwards that I had a typo on one of my slides, right? And I could either, say, okay, well, it was a great presentation. I'll fix the typo for next time and hopefully it won't be too bad. Or I could, if I was caught up in perfectionism, I might say, it doesn't matter that the presentation went well. Like, I had a typo. I can't believe I had a typo. Everybody's going to think I'm awful and I don't know how to spell because I had a typo. Right? Like, you could go down a really long rabbit hole. And so perfectionism really sort of steals the joy from things that we might have used to love, like we might love in general. But when it has to be perfect, when there's all this pressure, it often makes it difficult to enjoy it. So that's perfectionism. Perfectionism can lead to these next two things, which can also just kind of emerge out of low self-worth and imposter syndrome in general. So one is procrastination, right? When you feel either like everything has to be perfect or you don't feel good enough and you don't feel like you can do a good job, you're more likely to procrastinate because it feels either like, I don't want to try and fail, because if I try and fail, then I'll really be exposed as an imposter, right? Maybe it's easier just to like wait till the last minute. And then if it doesn't go well, I'd be like, oh, well, I waited till the last minute, not because of me, right? So there's this sort of defensiveness that can happen with procrastination if you feel imposter syndrome, right? And then the other piece is sometimes the pressure, right? I've got to do it perfectly or else I'm going to be exposed as a fraud. I've got to do it perfectly or else I'm going to lose my job. That can also make you procrastinate, right? So often when people are struggling with procrastination, they start to call themselves lazy. And I really don't think people are lazy. I think that people feel anxiety about doing the tasks they need to do. And when they procrastinate, they are avoiding experiencing that anxiety by procrastinating. And then there's often like a tipping point, which is you get closer to the deadline and then the anxiety of not doing it and not turning in the work gets higher than the anxiety of doing it. And so then you rush and you do it, right? That's often the cycle of procrastination. So then on the other end, there's overworking, right? So often perfectionism, low self-worth, imposter syndrome can lead to overworking. And this is, maybe if I just always do all the things all the time, then maybe they'll never find out I'm a fraud, and maybe I'll just keep it together, and maybe I'll do it perfect, and then maybe I'll be okay, and maybe I'll be worthy, right? So it's the constant busyness, the constant working, the constant email checking. You never put your phone down. You never stop. You feel like you always have to be on, and maybe if I just always do this, and right? And so then there's anxiety around stopping. It's hard to rest. It's hard to take breaks, right? So again, if you're using your work to prove your worth, then you are more likely to overwork, right? And so the other thing that can happen is a cycle of procrastination, followed by overworking, followed by procrastination, followed by overworking, because you're sort of procrastinating in the ways I was talking about before, and then you rush and you overwork, and then you're exhausted and it didn't feel good, and you don't necessarily feel so great about the work you did because it was so rushed, and then you procrastinate again, right? And we sort of create this cycle. All of these things can lead to burnout, right? I know that there, for me, a sign that I'm being burned out, this is something I experienced in my last job before I left, was people are asking me to do things that are part of my job, and I'm real irritated. Like, I'm like, why are you asking me to do this? And then I'm like, well, that is part of your job. You're supposed to do that, right? So there's different signs of burnout. Some may be physical, some may be mental, some may be emotional, but sort of generally there's this fatigue, this exhaustion, irritability, frustration, lack of enjoyment, and motivation, right? All of these things can sort of come in response to sort of like overworking yourself, striving for perfection, all of that stuff. And then the last piece that I want to talk about in terms of how low self-worth and imposter syndrome can show up, and this is one of the ones that I think is the saddest, is hiding. And what I mean by hiding is not truly showing up and sharing your gifts, staying under the radar, being a wallflower, thinking, okay, I feel like an imposter. I don't really think I'm supposed to be here. I think they made a mistake in this hire. So let me just stay quiet. I'm not going to ask any questions. I'm not really going to contribute, because if nobody notices me, then I won't get fired, right? It's just sort of this hiding, and you don't allow yourself to truly shine, to truly thrive, and to show up and share your gifts in a way that would be really invigorating and fulfilling for you, and would really benefit your organization and the world. All right, so we have another poll, and I would love to know, have you experienced any of these things?
Oh, what is your default? What is your default? And you have to, it says check all that apply, but I feel like we should try to, like, what's your real, all the above is there, but like, what's the one that you really go to? I know that mine for sure is the overworking, right? Mine's the like, here I'm going, I better just keep getting that answer out. I'll keep like, if I'm not in my highest and best place, I'm going to overworking. But I certainly know some of you are in the perfectionism bucket. I saw some of you saying, I can't almost not do it if it's not going to be, I just don't touch it. And I love that you said perfectionism and procrastination go close together, because I think a lot are saying like, oh, those are tough ones for me to choose from, because that perfectionism does so often feed that procrastination. So many of you. Oh. All right, anyone else want to answer? If you chatted me in the chat, great, but make sure you also answer on the screen just so we can see all the others. Oh, Glenda, thank you. Glenda's saying, hey, before COVID, I really used to do the overworking or the burned out piece, but like that was a reset, and I am so thankful for those of you who have been able to use that as a reset, and grateful to like think about what that is. We've done a lot of work for those of you who invested your hour a month in these. All right, Ella, I think that's it. For those of you who are, a lot of people who are saying, I've been thinking about it more. Oh, overworking, burnout, perfectionism, pretty split at 40-ish there, and then procrastination, all of the above. A few hiders still in there.
I see. Okay,
Oh.
overworking, burnout. My computer sort of like freezes every time the polls happen, so I caught it a little bit, but I think, these things are common, right? Regardless of which one is like your highest, but I just think even being able to recognize, and I love that people are saying that some people use COVID and working from home and all of that as a reset, that you're thinking about it more. I mean, I think we're, talking about burnout more because people are really exhausted. I think for some people, COVID has been very helpful. Well, let me rephrase that. COVID has not been helpful for anyone. For some people, working from home and changing work schedules and work routines has been very helpful. And for some people, it's been hard because there hasn't been boundaries between work and home. So there's a lot of people who have struggled with like sort of feeling like you're just always working because there really aren't any boundaries. You're not transitioning into the office or out of the office. And so, wherever you are on this, again, this is not sort of an opportunity to criticize yourself, but just to notice and to notice that, okay, this might be a pattern that I want to try to get out of or shift or change in some way. All right, so let's get to the good stuff. Unconditional self-worth. So I've talked about low self-worth, conditional self-worth. This is my definition of unconditional self-worth. And it's the belief that you deserve to be alive, to be loved and cared for, and to take up space just because you're human. Not because you've achieved something, not because you have a particular job title or relationship status, but just because you're human. So I want you to just kind of take a breath and see what it's like to take that in. This idea of unconditional self-worth, this idea that you are worthy of love, respect, and care, and taking up space just because you're human. And you might notice that your mind starts to come up with counter arguments, reasons that this is not true for you, or what if it was true, right? Just notice, right? There's no like good, bad. It often takes a lot of people some time and some work to really embrace this, but I just want you to sort of notice your initial kind of emotional response to this idea. And we're going to take that a little further. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to guide you through a visioning exercise, because I want you to envision your life of unconditional self-worth, a life where you're free from imposter syndrome and you know you're worthy. So what I'd love for you to do, if you are in a space where closing your eyes feels safe and comfortable, I'd love for you to do that. If you are not in a space where you can do that, just pick a spot to gaze at, not your email. That's non-distracting, right? So just try to kind of get in the zone, get in the mode, and that will help you to get the most out of this exercise. So I want you to start by closing your eyes, if that feels okay, and just taking a few slow, deep breaths. Just take a moment to notice how your body is feeling in the moment, wherever you're sitting or if you're standing. Just notice how you're feeling. Notice that you're supported by the floor, the chair, the couch. See if you can relax into that support a bit. And then I want you to imagine that you wake up tomorrow with a deep knowing that you are unconditionally worthy. You don't have to prove your worth. You don't have to earn your worth. You just know that you're worthy. And I want you to imagine how you would start your day, what the morning would look like for you if you were moving through the world knowing you were worthy. And I want you to envision getting started on work for the day, whether you're commuting to the office or working from home. So imagine what it would feel like to start work for the day without imposter syndrome, without feeling like you had to do everything perfectly, like you had to prove your worth. What would that be like? How would you feel? How would you engage in your work if you knew you were unconditionally worthy? If you knew you weren't an imposter? And then imagine you're attending a work meeting of some sort. How would you show up in that space without imposter syndrome, knowing you're worthy? What might look or feel different about your engagement in the meeting? And then imagine you're at the end of your day, ready to wrap up. Maybe it's 6 o'clock or so. And I want you to imagine how you'd feel at the end of the day, wrapping up work, transitioning home or into your personal life. How would that feel to end the workday knowing that you're worthy and free from imposter syndrome? And what would it be like to go to bed at night as you laid in bed before you fall asleep? What would that be like if you knew you were unconditionally worthy? So, I want you to take another deep breath and just bring yourself back to your surroundings. Maybe look around or notice things you see or hear. And just check in with yourself. How did that feel? I had another poll, but I think we're going to skip it just because of time. So I just, feel free to type in the chat what that was like. If there was anything that stood out to you about what life would feel like if you fully embrace the fact that you are unconditionally worthy. And you might, just take a quick picture of these questions if you want to reflect on them later. But, we've sort of been talking about them as we went through. So like, what conditions have you placed on your worth? How do you experience these manifestations of low self-worth and imposter syndrome at work? What did you envision for your life of unconditional self-worth? So these might be things that you could reflect on and come back to in the future. So let's talk about the goal. Often people are worried that if they let go of imposter syndrome or they believe they were unconditionally worthy, that all they would want to do is lay on the couch and do nothing. But my guess is that that was not what came up for you all in the visions that you created for yourself, right? And so I believe that when we know we are worthy, we show up more fully, we contribute our gifts and strengths, we take care of ourselves, and we feel less stress because our worth is no longer dependent on our work. And that is the goal, right? The goal is to feel good about ourselves, to show up, to share our gifts fully, and to not be hustling to prove our worth, but to know we are worthy and then show up from that space. And so now we're going to share a couple of strategies that will help you get there. And I think it's important to note that these strategies are intended to be practices. They're not like one and done things that are, that's it. You do it once and that's it. They're really sort of different ways of orienting towards yourself. So the first piece is to practice self-compassion. And self-compassion, there's actually a lot of great research on self-compassion. And it promotes resilience. It helps people to feel more worthy. It helps people with body image. It reduces stress, reduces anxiety, reduces depression, right? There's so many things that self-compassion is really useful for. And so self-compassion really involves acknowledging what you've experienced and how you feel without judgment, right? So that's sort of this mindfulness piece of self-compassion, right? You sort of tune in. If you're feeling stressed, if you're feeling frustrated, if you're feeling upset, take a moment, take a breath, tune in, right? So often what we do in those moments is we judge and we criticize ourselves, and that only serves to make it worse, right? So let's say you made a mistake, or you didn't do something that you were supposed to do. Imposter syndrome tells you to say, oh my gosh, see, you're going to get fired, all of this stuff, right? That's what imposter syndrome says. But what we want to do with self-compassion is say, okay, let's take a breath. How do I feel? I feel stressed, I feel sad, I feel scared, right? And then to remember that you're not the only one experiencing what you're experiencing, right? These are normal human things. We are human, we make mistakes, we don't get everything right all the time, right? And so that is what we want to remind ourselves, because that calms us down. And then we want to be kind to ourselves, right? And say, it's okay. It's okay that you made a mistake. How do you want to clean it up? How do you want to address it? And the reality is that we're in a much better position to fix a mistake, address a problem when we calm and soothe ourselves in this way than we are when we're like freaking out, right? How often have you been able to make a good decision when you're freaking out? When you're like, I'm gonna lose my job, and then I'm gonna be homeless, and everything's gonna be right. When you're in that space, really what happens in your brain is that your prefrontal cortex, which makes decisions, shuts down, and your amygdala, which is your emotional brain, takes over. And we cannot make very good decisions from that place. So part of what you're doing with self-compassion is that you're treating yourself as though you are worthy even when you make mistakes, because that is true. And the second thing is that you're soothing and calming yourself, right? You're calming your brain and your body down, and you're saying, it's okay. We're actually not under threat. And then from that space, you're able to make decisions, take steps, right? Like decide how to fix the situation or how to address the situation. And then this fourth piece is honoring your body, because so often when we're caught up in this overworking, perfectionism, all of this stuff, we're ignoring our bodily signs and symptoms that we need rest, that we need a break, that we need food, that we need nourishment. And so another piece of practicing self-compassion and really treating ourselves well is to tune into what is our body telling us, what do we need, and how do we take care of that. So that's practicing self-compassion. So I encourage you to think about, what is one way you could be kinder and more compassionate with yourself over the next week, right? There's a lot going on. We're almost at the end of the year, right? I'm imagining there's expectations, there's deadlines, there's all of these things going on. What is one way you could tune in? Could you breathe when you start to feel overwhelmed, right? Could you remember that a lot of the things you're experiencing are normal and human, and they don't mean something's wrong with you? Could you be kinder to yourself, right? Could you tune in and figure out what your body needs? Maybe it's getting more sleep. Maybe it's making sure to take a lunch break, right? So think about how you could incorporate this into your life over the next week, and then see how it works. Like, does it help? Is it useful? All right, I'm going to keep rolling because we're almost at the end, and then we can take questions if there are any. And then the other thing that I want to recommend, which I think is both helpful, it's helpful particularly for overcoming imposter syndrome, is to identify your strengths and what you can contribute. So one of the things that happens when we're struggling with imposter syndrome is that we spend a lot of time comparing ourselves to others. We feel like everybody else has it all together. I need to be just like them in order to have it together. And what this does is it challenges that idea. The reality is that our workplaces are much better when there's diversity of thought, diversity of experience, diversity of identity, diversity of strengths, right? We don't need everybody in a workplace to have the same strength, right? Like that wouldn't be very effective. We need people who are great listeners and other people who are great talkers. We need people who ask great questions. We need people who are great visionaries and people who are really organized and detail oriented, right? And so what I want you to do here is to think about your unique strengths and gifts. And the idea is, instead of trying to be perfect, instead of trying to get everything right all the time, you identify your unique strengths and gifts and focus on the intention to bring and share those, right? So it's less about being perfect and it's more about, you know what, I ask really great questions that move a conversation forward, or I'm a great listener, or I'm incredibly organized, or I'm great at planning events and gatherings to help people get together, whatever it is, right? And instead of thinking, I have to be perfect at everything all the time and putting all that pressure on yourself, and we talked about the problems with that, what I want you to do is say, okay, in the next meeting, I'm going to really intend to share my listening skills. In the next meeting, I'm going to be really thoughtful about the questions that I offer that's going to move our conversation forward. In the next meeting, I might volunteer to take notes or do something organizational because I'm really good at that. And then if you have that focus, it's much easier to be present and engaged and to own your contribution instead of feeling like I've got to be perfect or I've got to be just like everyone else. So, you know, what this looks like is, think about what you're good at and enjoy doing. Part of the challenges that most of us have is that usually our biggest strengths are things that we sort of overlook because they come very easy to us and we're good at them. So we think, oh, that's not a big deal. But other people are like, that's amazing that you can do that, right? So maybe think about, what do you tend to be really good at? What tends to sort of come very easily for you? What do people sort of compliment you on frequently? And then how do you want to contribute those to your department, to, you know, the world? Like, how do you want to contribute those? And then you focus on the intention, not perfection. Everything does not need to be perfect. I want you to focus on the intention. All right. So those are sort of the main strategies. There are, of course, many more strategies, but we cannot share them all today. And self-compassion is one of my favorite strategies because it's so helpful in so many ways. And identifying your strengths and what you want to contribute is also a big one. And so I would love for you to think about, how can you incorporate these things? How can you build these into your life or work over the next few weeks, right? We have 4 weeks left of this year, which is hard to believe. So think about, what would it look like to do a little experiment to really try to implement these things. And then the last thing I want to share very briefly before we go to questions is that if you are interested in taking this further, if you feel like this was just the tip of the iceberg, which it was, and you're interested in sort of digging further and you feel like, yeah, I really could use more support or structure in going further, I want to let you know that I do have an online program that's called Date Yourself, 4 weeks to a Healthy Relationship with You. And I'm not going to go into detail, but I am going to show you where you can learn more about it. And I do have a special discount for you all today if you're interested. So basically, you're going to let go of self-criticism, you're going to practice self-compassion, you're going to take care of yourself and be good to yourself. So this information is in the handout. You can learn more information about it, take advantage of the discount, and then we have time for questions, and I'll also share how you all can reach out to me if you have further questions.
Oh, thank you so much. I wanted to start with, so many of you are flooding me to say, wait, can she go back to that one slide? And wait, what is this session? So just let's all, like, 1 second. We're going to post all of this by the end of the day. Our goal will be to get the entire video up. We'll get everything kind of up with the presentation. So for those of you who are like, wait, I need more, we'll get it all to you. There were so many of you who have so many great chats. I know we are not even near time enough to get into the chats. So I think, first of all, we are going to have to, I want to say thank you so much. And number two, Ella, I think we need to maybe connect after and find out if we can do another session, because there's a whole lot of like, but wait, is there an answer? So let's all commit to going through what we've posted. Let's go through and make sure that if, for those of you who just know immediately that you need some additional help, that no matter how many little questions that we could get done in an hour, you still all know that what you could probably use is investing as little as $250 in yourself, to like think of all of what that could, the weight it would take off all of your heads. $252, like there are quite a few of you saying, I need to figure out how to reprogram some of the way I grew up, which was that there was never enough. And that was a really motivating thing. Like, never enough sounds great. Yeah, that I was doing something good. There's a whole lot of like deprogramming. I want to share quickly that there was just the most amazing exchange where someone said, you know, I never feel like I'm as together because I don't press my hair out and I'm not full of makeup and I'm not looking the highest fashion. And others that were saying, I spend so much damn money on nails and hair and crap to hide all the, so the fact that it's just different roads going to the same place, that someone's sitting here going, I'm not enough because I don't do all that. And someone else is going, I hope no one notices that I'm not enough because I do all that. It's so, it starts the way we kind of started this, which was we said last month, you don't solve your money stress by earning more money. You don't solve the not feeling like enough by then going out and doing nails and hair and ask all the people with the hairs and the nails and they're like, no, just hoping no one notices that I don't have it. Mike Perlo, doing all of it isn't the truth. So for so many of you, I won't even start to prioritize the questions because I know we only have 2 minutes. I more so want to just tell everyone by the end of the day, we will get it posted. We will talk to Dr. Gooden about coming back. Here are all the ways that you can start, even just getting more of this stuff around your head, following on Instagram, Facebook, a podcast, free ebook, like just sort of get your head around how can I change some of this. Thank you so much. Amy said, this has truly been a changing hour. What a great investment of my time. Sin, who is reminding me that if I let you go without telling you how amazing your glasses are, that forever I'm on her naughty list. So amazing, amazing glasses. There were a couple of others, but Sin was like, please do not let her hang up without letting her know that we are in love with them. So thank you again so much. Thank you all for investing the time. Reach out and connect on all these places that you can to find out if this 4-week program is something that it sounds like many of you could use some additional kind of work on. And Dr. Gooden, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
You tons. Love that you're changing lives 60 minutes at a time. Thank you all so much for joining. We'll see you all back next month. Thank you.